I was sitting at a table in a luxury hotel ballroom during our annual investor gala when my phone buzzed. The text was from Craig, my boss. It read, "Consider your access revoked. Effective immediately. Security will collect your belongings." My hand started shaking. Across from me sat Edward Hayes, the lead investor who'd funded our company 5 years ago. Without thinking, I slid my phone across the white tablecloth toward him. He picked it up, read the message, and his jaw tightened. He stood without saying a word, walked straight to the stage, and signaled the MC. He took the microphone, tapped it twice, and said into the silence, "Change of plans tonight." Let me back up 3 years. That's when I joined Datacrest Solutions as a senior software engineer. The company built data analytics platforms for healthcare systems, and they hired me specifically because I'd spent 6 years at a major hospital building patient outcome prediction models. I knew the healthcare technology space inside and out. Within 8 months of starting at Datacrest, I developed something I called MedPredict. It was a proprietary algorithm that could analyze patient data across multiple hospitals and predict potential complications 72 hours before they occurred. Doctors could intervene early, saving lives and millions in emergency costs. It was the kind of breakthrough that changes an entire industry. MedPredict became our flagship product almost immediately. Within a year, we'd signed contracts with 8 major hospital networks. Our revenue tripled. We went from 35 employees crammed into a converted warehouse to over 200 people in a proper office building with a cafeteria and everything. My boss was Craig Patterson, the VP of Product Development. He had an Ivy League MBA, a family with connections, and the kind of smooth confidence that made people trust him instantly. He'd been at Datacrest since the beginning, but he'd never actually built anything significant himself. When I presented MedPredict to the leadership team, I watched his eyes light up. He saw opportunity. At first I thought Craig was just being supportive. He started joining every presentation, every client meeting, every board update. He'd say things like, "Our team developed this incredible system," or "We've pioneered this approach." The word we slowly transformed into "I" over the following months. I noticed, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was just how corporate environments worked right. 6 months after MedPredict launched, I attended my first board meeting to present quarterly results. Except Craig presented instead. He stood at the front of the room with my slides, my data, my work, and he barely mentioned my name. When one of the board members asked a technical question about the neural network architecture, I started to answer. Craig cut me off mid-sentence. "Let me handle the strategic discussion," he said with that smooth smile. "Monique can follow up on technical details later." I never got to follow up. The meeting moved on. After our best quarter ever, I expected a promotion. I'd built the technology that saved the company. I'd worked 18-hour days perfecting the algorithm. I'd personally trained the hospital staff at our first 3 client sites. But when the promotions were announced, Craig became Chief Product Officer. I got a small bonus and a thank you email. That's when I started paying closer attention. I noticed my name disappearing from internal documents. Craig had a young assistant named Jeremy who spent his days reformatting presentation decks. Anywhere that said "developed by Monique Anderson" got changed to Datacrest Product Development Team or CPO Office. It was systematic. It was deliberate. I scheduled a meeting with Craig. I brought printouts of everything: my original code with timestamps, my patent application, drafts my initial presentations to the board. I laid them on his desk and said I need my contributions to be properly recognized. MedPredict is my work. Craig leaned back in his expensive leather chair and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Monique, you did excellent execution work. But the strategic vision came from leadership. You're a talented engineer, but you need to understand how businesses actually work. Everything you create while employed here belongs to Datacrest. And frankly, your attitude lately has been concerning. Several people have mentioned you seem possessive about team projects. I felt like I'd been punched. Possessive, I created this. I built it from nothing. 2 days later, I received an email from Human Resources. The subject line read, "Mandatory Review Performance Concerns." I opened it with my stomach already churning. The email detailed complaints from 3 colleagues. They claimed I was difficult to work with, that I took credit for team efforts, that I created a hostile environment by undermining leadership. The complaints were dated over the past 6 months. I'd never heard about any of these issues before. I didn't even recognize half the scenarios they described. But they were now part of my official personnel file. Craig had been building a case against me for months. I just hadn't seen it coming. I needed to understand what was happening, so I contacted the 3 colleagues named in the HR complaint. I had to know if they'd really said those things about me. First was Aisha, a junior developer on my team. I found her in the parking lot after work. "Aisha, did you file a complaint about me?" I asked quietly. She looked terrified. "I never said anything like that," she whispered, glancing around nervously. Jeremy called me into his office. He had this document with a bunch of questions. He told me it was just a routine feedback form, that everyone was filling one out. The questions were weird. Like, have you ever felt that senior team members dismissed leadership guidance? I checked some boxes without really thinking about it. I had no idea it would be used against you. I'm so sorry. Marcus was next. He was a project manager who'd worked with me on the hospital implementations. He met me at a coffee shop, but he was defensive from the start. "Look, Monique, I was told this was confidential feedback for Craig's leadership development program." They twisted what I said. "But I'm not getting involved in whatever this is. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids in private school. I can't afford to lose my job." The third person was Pauline, from Client Relations. She wouldn't meet with me at all. She sent a single text message, "Please don't contact me about this." I hired an employment attorney. Her name was Ruth Brennan, and she had a reputation for winning impossible cases. She was also expensive, but I didn't have a choice. "This is classic documentation building," Ruth explained during our first meeting. "They're creating a paper trail to justify terminating you or pushing you out. We need to counter it immediately with your own evidence." I spent the next week gathering everything I could find. Original code repositories with my author stamps and timestamps, emails showing me leading the MedPredict project from day one, client testimonials that praised me by name, technical design documents in my handwriting. It was mountains of proof that MedPredict was mine. Before Ruth could submit any of it to Human Resources, Craig made his next move. I arrived at work on a Tuesday morning just like always. I swiped my access card at the front entrance. The light turned red. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. I felt my chest tighten. Security called upstairs. 20 minutes later, the general counsel came down with 2 security officers. Her name was Patricia Vance, and she had the kind of cold expression that made my blood run cold. "Monique, we need you to come to conference room C," she said. It wasn't a request. Inside the windowless conference room, Patricia slid a folder across the table. "We've discovered serious irregularities in the MedPredict code repository. Several proprietary algorithms appear to have been copied to an external server registered to your personal email address. We're also investigating expense reports showing charges for equipment that was never delivered to company inventory. I stared at her. That's insane. I've never stolen anything from this company. I built MedPredict. Why would I need to steal my own work? Patricia's expression didn't change. We have server logs showing file transfers from your workstation to external servers. We have purchase orders with your digital signature for equipment worth over $80,000 that's unaccounted for. This constitutes theft of intellectual property and potential embezzlement. We're prepared to pursue criminal charges unless you sign a separation agreement immediately. Someone had set me up. Someone had used my credentials to transfer files. Someone had forged my signature on purchase orders. The external server they mentioned was actually a backup system I'd set up 18 months earlier with explicit approval from the former CTO, but he'd left the company 6 months ago, and every email about that approval had mysteriously disappeared from the system. Patricia pushed a document toward me. Sign this separation agreement. You admit no wrongdoing, but you leave immediately. You forfeit all stock options, which are currently worth approximately $400,000, and you surrender any claims to intellectual property. In exchange, we don't press charges. You have 2 hours to decide. I called Ruth immediately. She rushed over, read through the separation agreement, and her face went pale. "This is extortion," she said. "But Monique, I have to be honest with you. The evidence they've manufactured is sophisticated. If they press charges, even if you're eventually cleared, you'll be unemployable in technology for years. The legal fees alone could easily exceed $200,000. This is a nightmare scenario." Ruth's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, and I watched all the color drain from her face. She hung up slowly. "Monique, that was a colleague at the courthouse. Datacrest's attorneys just filed for a temporary restraining order against you. They're claiming you're a flight risk with stolen intellectual property. There's an emergency hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9. They're also pursuing seizure of assets pending investigation. If the judge grants this, they can freeze your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts, everything." I sat there in that conference room, and I understood with perfect clarity what was happening. Craig wasn't just stealing credit for my work. He was systematically destroying my entire life. The hearing was at 9 the next morning in Judge Catherine Morrison's courtroom. I sat beside Ruth at the defendant's table, wearing the most professional outfit I owned, trying to look like someone who wasn't about to lose everything. Datacrest's attorney was a man named Donald Breslin. He had silver hair, an expensive suit, and the kind of courtroom presence that came from 3 decades of practice. He presented their case with devastating precision. He showed the judge server logs that I knew were falsified but couldn't prove it. He showed financial irregularities that someone had manufactured using my credentials. He showed emails that I'd never written but that appeared to come from my account, discussing plans to sell proprietary technology to competitors. Ruth fought back as hard as she could, but we only had 20 minutes to respond. The judge was overwhelmed with a packed docket. She looked at the seemingly solid evidence from a major corporation and made her decision. "I'm granting the temporary asset freeze, pending full investigation," Judge Morrison said. "The restraining order is also granted. Miss Anderson is prohibited from accessing any Datacrest property, contacting any Datacrest employees, or approaching within 500 feet of Datacrest facilities." My checking account was frozen. My savings account was frozen. My brokerage account with 10 years of careful investing was frozen. My Datacrest stock options worth $400,000 were seized as potential proceeds of intellectual property theft. I walked out of that courthouse with $600 in cash in my wallet. That was everything I had access to. My rent was $2,300 per month, due in 5 days. My car payment was $387, due in 3 days. My health insurance premium was $412, due in a week. The math was simple and terrifying. My boyfriend Derek tried to be supportive at first. "We'll figure this out," he said that first night. But as days turned into weeks, as I couldn't contribute to any bills, couldn't go out to restaurants, couldn't do anything except stress about my legal situation, Derek changed. 3 weeks after the asset freeze, Derek sat me down. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "You're not the same person. You're consumed by this legal nightmare. I need someone who's present, who's stable. I'm sorry." He moved out the next day, taking half the furniture we'd bought together. I couldn't make rent. My landlord was actually sympathetic, but he had his own mortgage to pay. After I was 30 days late, he had no choice but to begin eviction proceedings. State law gave me 45 days to vacate. I called my mother in Ohio. "Sweetheart, we'd help if we could," my mom said, and I could hear the pain in her voice. "But we're living on Dad's pension and Social Security. We just don't have that kind of money. Can you stay with friends?" I tried. I reached out to everyone I could think of. Most didn't respond at all. A few sent sympathetic messages, but nothing concrete. The ones who did respond said things like, "I'm so sorry, but I can't be seen associating with you right now." Craig sent an all-company email warning about legal liabilities of communicating with you. My best friend from college, Jasmine, let me stay on her couch for 2 weeks. But then her roommate said, "I'm uncomfortable with this." I looked her up online. There are articles about theft and fraud. I don't want that energy in my home. Someone had leaked the story to technology blogs. Headlines read, "Datacrest engineer accused of stealing groundbreaking medical AI." The comments sections were brutal. Anonymous strangers called me a fraud, a thief, said I was trying to steal company innovations for personal gain. My LinkedIn connections started disappearing. People I'd known for years removed me from their professional networks. I was radioactive. I moved what belongings I could fit into my 12-year-old Honda Civic. Everything else went into a storage unit that cost $89 per month. I could afford 1 month, maybe 2 if I was lucky. I started sleeping in my car. I found a grocery store parking lot that allowed overnight parking. I'd recline the driver's seat as far as it would go and try to sleep while cars pulled in and out around me all night. I showered at a gym using day passes that cost $12 each. I could only afford to do that every few days. I ate cheap food from dollar stores, ramen noodles, granola bars, whatever was filling and cost less than $3. I spent my days at the public library using free internet access. I applied to jobs, but no one called back. I tried to find evidence to clear my name, but every lead went nowhere. I researched Craig looking for anything I could use, but he'd covered his tracks perfectly. The stress manifested physically. I lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. I developed insomnia, which was ironic since I was already barely sleeping in my car. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, parked outside a 24-hour diner I couldn't afford to eat, and having panic attacks where I couldn't breathe. One night, sitting in my car with the windows cracked for air, I broke down completely. I was 34 years old. I had a master's degree in computer science from a respected university. I'd created technology that was literally saving lives in hospitals across the country, and I was homeless, broke, and facing potential criminal charges for crimes I didn't commit. I put my head on the steering wheel and sobbed. That's when Ruth called. I answered with shaking hands. Monique, I've been digging into Craig's background, Ruth said. I've discovered something. Craig isn't just taking credit for MedPredict. He's in active negotiations to sell DataCrest to MedTech Solutions, one of the biggest healthcare conglomerates in the country. The sale price is $900 million. The entire deal is centered on MedPredict. If this goes through, Craig personally stands to make approximately $70 million from his stock options. I felt physically sick. Ruth continued, There's more. Craig has presented himself to MedTech Solutions as the creator of MedPredict. He's shown them patents with his name on them. Monique, he's filed patents for your work with himself listed as the sole inventor. He forged your signature on inventor assignment documents. This isn't just career sabotage. This is systematic fraud at a massive scale. And the sale is set to be announced at the annual investor gala in 3 days. Once that deal closes, any chance of proving your case becomes exponentially harder. The fraud gets locked in. 3 days. I had 72 hours before Craig made $70 million on my stolen work while I slept in my car. I sat in my car in that parking lot and something shifted inside me. I'd spent 6 weeks being scared, being reactive, being a victim. I was done with that. I needed to stop this sale before it happened. I couldn't fight Craig through legal channels anymore. That would take years I didn't have. I needed something dramatic, something immediate, something that would expose him publicly before the deal closed. At the public library the next morning, I pulled up everything I could find about the MedTech Solutions acquisition, press releases, SEC filings, business journal articles. I learned the deal had been in secret negotiations for 7 months. MedTech was desperate for MedPredict because their own AI division had failed spectacularly and they were losing contracts to competitors. The acquisition announcement was scheduled for the annual investor gala, black tie event at the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown. 200 attendees, investors, board members, major clients, technology press, industry analysts. I found the event website. They had a page listing confirmed attendees. I scrolled through names, looking for anyone who might listen to me, anyone who might have influence. Then I saw it. Edward Hayes, managing partner, Catalyst Ventures. Edward Hayes had been DataCrest's first major investor 5 years ago, when the company was just 12 people in a converted warehouse with more ambition than revenue. Edward's venture capital fund had invested $8 million for a 30% stake. It was the investment that let us hire real talent, build real products, become a real company. I'd worked directly with Edward during his due diligence process. He'd interviewed me personally, spent 3 hours asking technical questions about my background and vision. He'd been impressed. He'd told the founders that I was the kind of engineer who could build something extraordinary. That was 5 years ago. Would he even remember me? But it was the only chance I had. I couldn't get an invitation to the gala. Craig had made sure I was completely blacklisted. But I also knew these events had moments of chaos. During arrivals, during cocktail hour, during the transitions between dinner courses, security couldn't watch everything. I compiled all my evidence onto a USB drive. Original code with my timestamps proving I'd written MedPredict, emails showing my leadership, client correspondence praising me by name, analysis of the forged patent documents, showing obvious discrepancies, side-by-side comparison of the falsified server logs, a 3-page summary document explaining exactly what Craig had done, written in clear, factual language. I also had one nice dress left from my old life. A simple black cocktail dress I'd worn to a DataCrest event 2 years ago. It was wrinkled from being stuffed in a garbage bag in my car, but I used the public library bathroom to steam it with wet paper towels held under the hot air hand dryer. It wasn't perfect, but it would pass. I used my last $40 to get a haircut at a beauty school where students practiced on volunteer clients. The student was nervous and took forever, but the cut was decent. I borrowed makeup from Jasmine, telling her I had a job interview. She let me come over and use her bathroom mirror. I made myself look as professional and put together as possible. No one could know I'd been sleeping in my car. No one could know I was desperate. I had to look like I belonged. The gala started at 7. I arrived at 7:15, when cocktail hour would be in full swing. The Grand Meridian was a beautiful hotel with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, valet parking out front, well-dressed people streaming in. The main ballroom entrance had security checking invitations. I couldn't go through there. I walked around the building looking for another way in. I found the service entrance where catering staff were bringing in supplies. Delivery trucks parked in the loading zone. People in black server uniforms rushing back and forth. I watched for a moment, then grabbed an empty catering tray someone had left on a cart. I walked in like I'd done it 1,000 times. Confidence is everything. The kitchen was chaos. Chefs shouting orders, servers loading trays, managers directing traffic. I walked through like I belonged, set down my tray and kept moving. I found a black apron hanging on a hook, put it on, then ditched it 30 seconds later once I was past the kitchen. I followed signs toward the ballroom, heard the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses, took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and walked in. The ballroom was stunning. Crystal chandeliers throwing rainbows across white tablecloths. Round tables set for 10 with elaborate centerpieces. Ice sculptures. A string quartet playing. 200 people in tuxedos and evening gowns holding champagne flutes, networking, laughing. I scanned the room for Edward Hayes. Didn't see him. My heart pounded. I moved along the perimeter, trying not to draw attention. Then I spotted Craig. He was near the bar, laughing loudly, hand on the shoulder of a man I recognized from photos as a MedTech Solutions executive. Craig looked triumphant. He wore a custom tuxedo that probably cost $5,000. His watch caught the light, definitely worth $30,000 or more. Rage burned in my chest, but I kept moving. I finally found Edward. He was seated at table 7, marked with a small sign reading Catalyst Ventures. He was alone at the table, scrolling through his phone while others mingled. He was in his early 60s, distinguished-looking with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. I walked over. My mouth was dry. "Mr. Hayes." He looked up. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition dawned. Monique Anderson. "Yes, I need 2 minutes of your time, please." He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "Sit. You look like you've been through hell. What happened to you?" Saturday, took a breath, and told him everything as quickly as I could. Craig stealing credit, the manufactured complaints, the falsified evidence, the frozen assets, losing everything, the fraudulent patents, the acquisition based on lies. I pulled out the USB drive. This has proof. All of it. Original code, emails, everything. Craig is selling this company to MedTech Solutions tonight, based on technology I created. He's forged patents with his name. He's about to make $70 million on my stolen work while I've been living in my car for the past 6 weeks. Edward's expression was grave, Monique, these are serious allegations. I know how it sounds, but please just look at the evidence. You know me. You interviewed me 5 years ago. You know I built real things. I'm not a thief. I'm not a fraud. Craig is. Before Edward could respond, my phone buzzed in my clutch. I looked at it instinctively confused about who would be texting me. It was from Craig's number. The message read, "Consider your access revoked. Effective immediately. Security will collect your belongings." I stared at the screen. I'd been fired months ago. Why was he sending this now? Then I understood. Craig had spotted me in the ballroom. He was sending this to humiliate me, to make sure anyone I tried to talk to would see I was fired, discredited, finished. One last twist of the knife. My hands trembled. Edward noticed. "What is it?" I didn't think. I just acted on pure instinct. I slid my phone across the white tablecloth to him. This is what kind of man Craig Patterson is. Edward picked up the phone, read the message. His jaw tightened. Something cold and furious appeared in his eyes. He stood up, walked toward the stage where the MC was preparing to begin the formal program. He said something quietly to the MC. The MC nodded and stepped aside. Edward took the microphone, tapped it twice. The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look. "Change of plans tonight," Edward said. Edward Hayes commanded attention. As managing partner of one of the most respected venture capital funds in the industry when he spoke, people listened. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for interrupting cocktail hour, but something has come to my attention that cannot wait. For those who don't know me, I'm Edward Hayes from Catalyst Ventures. We were Datacrest's first institutional investor 5 years ago. We believed in this company when it was just 12 people with a vision. We've been privileged to watch it grow." Craig was near the bar. I watched confusion cross his face, then nervousness. He started walking toward the stage. Edward continued. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. Datacrest's acquisition by MedTech Solutions. A $900 million deal built on the incredible success of MedPredict, the artificial intelligence platform that's revolutionizing patient care at hospitals across the country." Scattered applause started. Edward raised his hand to stop it. "But I need to ask a question publicly right now. Craig Patterson, could you please come up here?" Craig had no choice. With 200 pairs of eyes on him, he walked to the stage wearing his frozen smile. Edward said, "Craig, I'd like you to explain to everyone here in technical terms how MedPredict's core algorithm works. Specifically, the neural network architecture that enables 72-hour complication prediction." Craig's face went pale. He stammered, "Well, Edward, this isn't really the appropriate venue for deep technical discussion. It's proprietary information and—" "I'll make it simpler then," Edward interrupted. "What type of neural network does MedPredict use? Is it convolutional, recurrent, or transformer-based?" Craig fumbled for words. "It's a hybrid approach, utilizing multiple architectures in concert." "That's not an answer," Edward said coldly. "Let me try something else. What data pre-processing steps are necessary before feeding patient records into MedPredict?" Craig looked trapped. "Look, I'm the Chief Product Officer. I focus on strategic vision and business development. I have talented engineers who handle the technical details." "Interesting," Edward said. "Because the man who is about to make $70 million from this acquisition should probably be able to answer basic questions about the technology he supposedly invented." He turned to the audience. "Would the real creator of MedPredict please stand up?" Every eye in the ballroom searched. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I forced myself to stand from table 7. My legs shook, but I stood tall. More whispers. Some people recognized me. Others looked confused. Edward said Monique Anderson. She was DataCrest's senior software engineer. She built MedPredict from the ground up. She wrote every line of the original algorithm. She spent 18 months perfecting it. And 6 months ago, Craig Patterson systematically destroyed her career, stole credit for her work, had her fired on false allegations of theft and embezzlement, and succeeded in getting her assets frozen. She's been living in her car for the past month and a half. The ballroom erupted. Conversations exploded everywhere. Phones came out. The MedTech Solutions executives at their table looked at each other with alarm. Craig grabbed the microphone from Edward. "This is absurd. This woman was terminated for cause. There's an ongoing criminal investigation into her theft of intellectual property. She's making desperate accusations because she couldn't handle being fired for her own misconduct. She wasn't even invited tonight. She crashed this event." Edward took the microphone back. "Then let's look at facts. Monique, could you bring up what's on that USB drive?" A hotel tech person scrambled to help. Within 90 seconds, my USB drive was connected to the presentation system. The giant screens around the ballroom lit up. First image. The original MedPredict code repository. My name as author on 92% of the commits. Timestamps, going back 3 years. Second image. An email from me to Craig's predecessor describing my breakthrough approach to complication prediction, dated 2 weeks before Craig claimed to have conceived the idea. Third image. Side by side. Comparison of a patent application with Craig's name versus my original provisional patent application filed 6 months earlier. Fourth image, server logs, showing the file transfers Craig's team claimed I'd made. Metadata proving they'd been created and backdated after I was locked out of the system. The room was silent, except for the clicking of phone cameras capturing the screens. But Craig wasn't finished. Desperation made him dangerous. "None of that matters," Craig shouted into the microphone. "All work created by employees belongs to the company. Monique was an employee. Even if she wrote some code, it's DataCrest's property. The intellectual property is sound. The acquisition goes forward." Edward looked at Craig with pure contempt. "Except for one detail you've forgotten. 5 years ago, as part of Catalyst Ventures' initial investment, we negotiated specific contractual provisions. One of those provisions states that in the event of executive misconduct involving fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, or intellectual property, misappropriation, Catalyst Ventures has the right to trigger a forced buyout of management shares, initiate emergency board restructuring." Craig's face went from pale to gray. "You can't do that. The board approved everything. The board approved based on fraudulent information you provided," Edward said. "As of this moment, Catalyst Ventures is exercising that contractual provision. We're also placing a formal hold on the MedTech Solutions acquisition, pending full investigation of these allegations." A woman stood up from one of the front tables. She was in her 50s, wearing an emerald dress, and she walked to the stage with the kind of authority that filled a room. I didn't recognize her. The woman took the microphone from Edward. "I'm Angela Torres, CEO of MedTech Solutions. I want to make something very clear to everyone here. MedTech Solutions does not do business with frauds. We conducted extensive due diligence based on representations that Craig Patterson was the principal inventor of MedPredict technology. If those representations were false, This acquisition is terminated, permanently." She looked directly at me. "Miss Anderson, I'd like to speak with you privately after this concludes." Craig made one last desperate move. He lunged toward the laptop connected to the projection system, clearly trying to delete or disconnect the evidence. 2 security officers grabbed him before he reached it. The entire ballroom watched as Craig Patterson was physically escorted out of his own gala. But then Ruth appeared at my side, breathless. "Monique," she said urgently, "I just got a call from Patricia Vance, Datacrest's general counsel. She said Craig gave her an ultimatum this morning. He told her if she didn't continue supporting his version of events, he'd fire her and destroy her career, just like he destroyed yours. She's been secretly compiling evidence against him for 2 months. She's ready to turn everything over. But there's a problem." "What problem?" I asked, my stomach sinking. "Craig has a fail-safe. If he goes down, he's programmed a complete wipe of the MedPredict source code from all company servers. It's set to trigger automatically if his security access is revoked. And they just revoked it when security removed him. The deletion process started 30 seconds ago. In less than 4 minutes, MedPredict will be completely erased from every system. The only remaining copy of the source code is on Craig's personal laptop, and no one knows where it is." The triumph turned to disaster in an instant. Without the source code, MedPredict was worthless. The acquisition would die, the company would collapse, and I would have nothing. The ballroom erupted into chaos again. Board members pulled out phones, shouting into them. The MedTech Solutions team huddled together, their faces grim. Edward immediately got on his phone with Datacrest's IT department, but I could tell from his expression it was bad. 4 minutes, maybe less now. The source code represented 3 years of work, thousands of hours, countless nights perfecting algorithms. My entire professional legacy was being deleted in real time. "Where is Craig?" I asked the security officers. "We escorted him to a service hallway. He's probably heading to the parking garage." I ran. I kicked off my heels and sprinted barefoot across the polished ballroom floor through the service corridor, following the signs to parking. Behind me I heard Edward shouting, "Stop that woman! Wait, no! Help her! Someone help her!" I burst through the stairwell door into the parking garage. Fluorescent lights, concrete, the smell of exhaust. I spotted Craig 50 yards away getting into a black Mercedes. "Craig," I screamed. He looked up, saw me coming, and scrambled to start the car. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. My lungs burned. My bare feet slapped against cold concrete. I reached his door just as the engine turned over. I pounded on the window with both fists. "You need to stop the deletion," I gasped. "Please, you'll destroy everything, not just for me, for the patients, for the hospitals. People are alive right now because of MedPredict. Whatever you've done to me, don't do this to them." Craig's face was pure rage and humiliation. He rolled down the window 2 inches. "I built this company. I made it successful. You were just a cog in the machine. If I can't have it, no one can." He started rolling up the window. I saw a laptop bag on his passenger seat. That had to be it. The laptop with the override codes, or possibly the only remaining copy of the source code. I did something I'd never done in my life. I reached through the gap in the window, unlocked the door from inside, and yanked it open before Craig could stop me. I grabbed the laptop bag. Craig lunged for it. We struggled. The bag tore. The laptop fell onto the concrete garage floor with a terrible cracking sound. Craig jumped out of the car, trying to reach it first. I got there half a second faster and snatched it up. The screen was cracked, but still glowing. "Give me that," Craig shouted, advancing on me. I backed away, holding the laptop against my chest. Craig grabbed my wrist, trying to wrench it away. His grip was tight enough to bruise. Then security burst through the stairwell door, followed by Edward and 2 police officers who'd been working security at the gala. "Sir, you need to step back," one officer said, pulling Craig away from me. Edward reached me. "Do you have it?" "I think so," I said. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the laptop. "I don't know how much time we have left." They brought me back to the ballroom. A hotel tech person cleared a table, set up the laptop with the projection system. I sat down, my fingers flying over the keys even though they were trembling. The screen showed I had 90 seconds before the deletion completed. Craig had protected his laptop with multiple security layers. Biometric login, encrypted partitions. I had no passwords, no access codes, no fingerprints. But I knew Craig. I'd worked with him for 3 years. He was arrogant, he was lazy, he thought he was smarter than everyone else. I tried his wedding anniversary as a password. Failed. Tried his daughter's birthday. Failed. 70 seconds left. Then I remembered something. At a company party 2 years ago, Craig had been drunk, boasting about his high school football glory. He'd played quarterback at some Connecticut prep school. What was the team name? The Eagles, the Panthers, the Titans, Fairfield Titans. I typed Titans 2002. The laptop unlocked. 60 seconds. I navigated to the admin control panel as fast as I could. Found the deletion process running. It was a sophisticated script already 87% complete. I didn't have time to stop it through normal methods. I did the only thing I could think of. I initiated a complete system shutdown. Hard shutdown. The kind that could corrupt data but would immediately halt all running processes. The laptop screen went black. The ballroom was silent. 200 people held their breath. I immediately rebooted the system. As it loaded, I prayed that the source code repositories had been on a partition that hadn't been fully erased yet. The system came back up. I navigated to the file directory. My heart sank. The main repository folder showed 0 bytes. It was gone. Completely wiped. But then I remembered Craig's paranoia. He was terrified of losing data. He probably had automated backups running constantly. I searched the laptop for backup software. Found it. A cloud backup service that synced every 4 hours. Last sync 2 hours ago before the deletion started. I initiated an emergency restore from cloud backup. The progress bar appeared, restoring 47.3 gigabytes of data. Estimated time 8 minutes. We had to wait. There was nothing else to do. While the progress bar slowly filled, Patricia Vance stood up from her table. She was the general counsel who'd threatened me with criminal charges just weeks ago. Now she walked to the front of the room and took the microphone. "I need to make a statement," she said. Her voice shook but remained steady. "For the past 6 months, I've participated in a conspiracy to defraud Monique Anderson and misrepresent the origins of MedPredict technology. Craig Patterson coerced me by threatening my career and my professional reputation. But that doesn't excuse what I've done. I've been secretly documenting everything for the past 2 months, hoping for a chance to make it right. I have detailed evidence of Craig's fraud. Recordings of conversations where he explicitly discussed fabricating evidence against Monique and forging patent documents. I'm turning all of this over to the appropriate authorities and to this board. I'm also tendering my resignation from Datacrest, effective immediately." The room stayed silent. Then Thomas Wu, one of the original board members, stood up. "I want to go on record. I was misled. We were all misled." Craig presented Monique as a disgruntled employee who couldn't handle corporate structure. "We failed in our duty to investigate properly. That failure nearly destroyed an innocent person's life and almost cost this company everything of value it possesses. I move that we terminate Craig Patterson for cause with forfeiture of all stock and benefits. I further move that we offer Monique Anderson the position of Chief Technology Officer with full back pay restoration of all stock options and a formal public apology." One by one, other board members stood in agreement. The laptop chimed. "Restore complete." I opened the restored files with shaking hands. The entire MedPredict source code was there, intact. Every line, every algorithm, every comment. 3 years of work saved. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Edward put his hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said quietly. But Angela Torres from MedTech Solutions approached, her expression serious. "Miss Anderson, I need to be frank with you. This situation has created enormous complications for my company. Our board is going to have serious concerns about moving forward with any acquisition. The fraud, the legal exposure, the public spectacle. Even though you've saved the source code, I'm not confident I can convince my board that Datacrest is still a viable acquisition target. We may have to walk away entirely. If MedTech Solutions walked away, Datacrest would likely collapse. The stock would become worthless. Hundreds of employees would lose their jobs. And while I might be vindicated, I'd be Chief Technology Officer of a failed company with no resources and no future. Everything I'd fought for was still hanging by a thread. I stood up, my torn dress, my bare feet, my bruised wrist from Craig's grip. I probably looked like I'd been through a war, but I stood straight. And I looked Angela Torres directly in the eye. "Miss Torres, you're right that this situation is complicated. But let me tell you what isn't complicated. MedPredict works. Right now, at this very moment, it's running in 83 hospital systems across this country. It's analyzing data for over 4 million patients. In the past 30 days alone, it flagged 647 patients for early intervention who would have otherwise suffered major complications. I can show you the outcomes data: reduced mortality rates, reduced intensive care admissions, over $200 million in saved healthcare costs in a single month. That's real. That's measurable. That's not corporate politics or public relations. That's genuine innovation, saving actual human lives." I pulled up a file on the laptop and projected it. Real data, real patient outcomes, anonymized but concrete. Numbers that told a story of lives saved. Your company didn't want Datacrest because of Craig Patterson, or the board structure, or the corporate image. You wanted it because of this. I pointed at the data on the screens. And I'm the only person in this room who can guarantee its continued development and expansion. I know every line of code. I know exactly how to scale it to handle 10 times the current patient load. I have complete roadmaps for version 2 and version 3 already designed. I have ideas for expansion into surgical outcome prediction, medication, interaction forecasting, and emergency department triage optimization. Craig Patterson had none of that. He didn't even understand the basic architecture. He was selling you a product he couldn't explain and couldn't sustain. Angela studied me for a long moment. Then she turned to Edward. "What's your fund's position here?" Edward didn't hesitate. Catalyst Ventures fully supports making Monique Anderson the Chief Technology Officer with equity compensation that reflects her true contributions. We believe DataCrest under proper technical leadership remains an exceptional investment. We're prepared to support restructuring the acquisition deal with Monique as the key technical leader and a central figure in the transition. Angela looked back at me. If I go back to my board, if I convince them to move forward despite this disaster, I need you to be completely committed, not as an employee who can leave, as a true partner with significant stake in success. What if, instead of MedTech Solutions acquiring DataCrest in a traditional structure, we proposed a merger with you as Chief Technology Officer of the combined Healthcare AI division with a seat on the board of the merged entity, substantial equity? The next 2 hours were intense. We moved from the ballroom to a hotel conference room. Lawyers joined by phone. Board members from both companies participated remotely and in person. Numbers were discussed. Structures were proposed and revised. Craig had been taken away by police. Criminal charges were being prepared for fraud, forgery, theft of intellectual property, and extortion. His legal team would try to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. He'd eventually plead guilty and serve 7 years in prison. Patricia Vance, despite offering her resignation, was asked to stay on temporarily to help unravel the legal complications she'd helped create. She'd face professional consequences, but her cooperation and evidence would mitigate the damage. The board members who'd enabled Craig through negligence had their own reckoning. 3 resigned immediately. Others stayed, but with severely damaged reputations. By 11:30 that night, we had a new deal structure. MedTech Solutions would acquire DataCrest for $750 million instead of $900 million, reflecting the reputational damage and legal cleanup costs. I would become Chief Technology Officer of the Healthcare AI division. My compensation package included a base salary of $480,000 per year, stock options worth $25 million vesting over 4 years, and a signing bonus of $3 million paid immediately. Most importantly, there was a clause written directly into the merger agreement. Monique Anderson would be formally and publicly recognized as the creator and principal inventor of MedPredict technology. Her name would appear on all patents, all marketing materials, all technical documentation, and all public communications about the technology. Edwards Venture Capital Fund would maintain a board seat to ensure proper governance going forward. The story broke nationally by morning. Technology news sites ran headlines like Silicon Valley fraud exposed engineer recovers stolen technology at investor gala and from homeless to CTO, the Monique Anderson story. The false narrative Craig had created collapsed completely. Journalists tracked down the people he'd coerced. They recanted their statements, publicly explaining the pressure and manipulation they'd faced. The criminal case against me was dropped with prejudice. The judge who'd frozen my assets issued a formal order releasing everything with an unusual written statement expressing regret for the injustice. My bank accounts were unfrozen. My stock options were restored and would now convert into the more valuable MedTech Solutions stock. My credit score would recover. Craig Patterson faced multiple felony charges. Despite his expensive legal team, the evidence was overwhelming. He eventually pleaded guilty to fraud, forgery, and theft of intellectual property, receiving a 7-year prison sentence and orders to pay restitution. The $3 million signing bonus hit my account 2 weeks later. The first thing I did was donate $50,000 to homeless services in my city. I knew what it was like to sleep in a car, to not know where your next meal would come from. If I could help even a few people avoid that experience, it was worth every penny. The second thing I did was rent a beautiful apartment, 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a real kitchen. I didn't need 2 bedrooms, but I wanted space. I wanted to never feel trapped again. I bought a new car. Nothing extravagant, just a reliable vehicle that wouldn't break down. I paid off my parents' mortgage as a surprise. When I told them over video call, my mother cried for 20 minutes. My father just kept saying, "Sweetheart, you didn't have to do that," while wiping his eyes. My first day as Chief Technology Officer at MedTech Solutions felt surreal. I had a corner office with a view, a team of 50 talented engineers reporting to me, a budget that made my head spin. But more than any of that, I had respect. When I walked into meetings, people listened. When I presented technical roadmaps, board members took notes. When I made decisions, they were implemented. I hired several people from the old Datacrest team, people who'd been caught in Craig's crossfire. Marcus, the project manager who'd been too scared to help me before, apologized profusely. I gave him a second chance. People make mistakes when they're afraid. I understood that more than most. Aisha, the junior developer who'd been manipulated into signing the false complaint, became one of my direct reports. I mentored her carefully, teaching her not just about coding, but about standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying. The personal healing took longer than the professional restoration. I started therapy to process the trauma of what I'd been through. The nightmares about living in my car took months to fade. I'd wake up sometimes panicked, thinking I was back in that parking lot. Then I'd see my bedroom with its comfortable bed and windows showing the city lights, and I'd remember I was safe. I reconnected with Jasmine slowly. Our friendship had been damaged but not destroyed. We rebuilt it over coffee dates and long conversations. Derek, my ex-boyfriend, reached out 6 months later wanting to reconcile. I declined politely but firmly. Some relationships once broken shouldn't be repaired. I needed someone who could stand beside me in crisis, not someone who'd leave when things got hard. I dated eventually, but carefully. I'd learned I didn't need someone to complete me. I needed someone who could be a true partner. A year after that night at the gala, I stood on stage at a major healthcare technology conference, delivering the keynote address to 3,000 people. I talked about MedPredict's evolution. Version 2 had launched with surgical outcome prediction. Early data showed a 23% reduction in post-operative complications. I talked about the importance of protecting innovators, of giving credit where it's due, of creating corporate cultures where truth matters more than politics. I told parts of my story, not for sympathy, but as a lesson. I want every engineer, every developer, every creator in this audience to know that your work has value, your contributions matter. Document everything. Keep detailed records. Don't let anyone erase you from your own story. And if they try, fight back. Not with anger, but with truth and evidence and determination. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Afterwards, a young woman in her 20s approached me nervously. "Miss Anderson, I'm a junior developer at a startup. My boss has been taking credit for my work. I didn't know what to do, but after hearing your story, I'm going to document everything and request a formal meeting with our board. Thank you for showing me it's possible to fight back and win." I smiled. "It won't be easy. It might take time. But your work is yours. Don't let anyone steal that from you." Late that night, back in my apartment, I stood by those floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city lights. I thought about the text message that had started everything public. "Consider your access revoked." Craig had meant to destroy me with those words. Instead, he'd triggered his own downfall and my ultimate victory. I thought about the night I'd spent in my car, broken and hopeless, wondering if I'd ever recover. I had recovered. More than recovered. I'd been vindicated, restored, and elevated beyond what I'd imagined possible. But more importantly, I'd learned something about myself. I was stronger than I'd known. I could survive the worst betrayal, the most systematic destruction, and still find the strength to stand up and fight back. The corporate world wasn't fair. It wasn't just. People would lie, cheat, and steal to advance themselves. They'd destroy others without conscience. But truth, when backed by solid evidence and unwavering determination, could still win. Not always, not easily, but possibly. And possibility was enough to make the fight worthwhile. I opened my phone and created a new note. I titled it, Lessons Learned. One document, everything, every contribution, every email, every success. Your records are your protection. 2, build genuine relationships with people who matter. Edward Hayes remembered me because I'd made a real impression 5 years earlier. Those connections can save you. 3, competence is your ultimate protection. I could prove MedPredict was mine because I truly understood it at the deepest level. Know your work better than anyone else. 4, when you're backed into a corner with nothing left to lose, that's when you're most dangerous. Desperation can fuel courage. 5, never let anyone else tell your story. Fight to control your own narrative. I saved the note. Maybe someday I'd expand it into a book, or maybe I'd just keep it as a reminder. Outside my window, the city glowed with 1,000,000 lights. Each one represented someone with their own struggles, their own battles, their own moments of despair and triumph. I was just one person among millions, but I was shining brightly now, and I intended to keep shining for a very long time. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work? How did you handle it? What would you do if you were in my situation? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or inspiration, or just made you think, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories of people who fought back against injustice and won. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to overcome even the worst betrayal. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that no matter how dark things get, no matter how impossible the situation seems, you have more strength inside you than you realize. Keep fighting, keep documenting, keep believing in the truth. And never, ever let anyone steal your story. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.